Hello and welcome. First time outside in a little while. And I'll continue or move straight on with looking at your comments and questions, all of which are very interesting, and I appreciate you taking the time to make comments and send in your questions, whether it's in the comments section on YouTube or by email. And it is those that make this channel content, I suppose you'd describe it as yours, appropriate to you and your practice. And I'm here to share, by way of my own experience, that experience of my practice with you, in the hopes that it may be of some benefit. So these are not teachings, more sharings, and I like to think of it as a two-way exchange, interdependent, as monks are with lay folk, lay people, because we require the lay people, lay men and lay women, upasakas and upasikas, for our everyday existence, a little bit of food each day, shelter, clothing and medicine when required. And we support them by return with sharing of the Dharma and setting, by example, the way forward on the Noble Eightfold Path as to how they also can practice, you also can practice. And the first comment here, I'm not sure I fully understand, but I will just hopefully be able to point someone or some people in the right direction maybe. I don't know why I'm here. Epilepsy can be bloody and abusive and can take me out for days. So understandably and appreciably serious condition, and like all these things, I would always suggest you are someone who's obviously taken professional medical advice in this matter, but with regards to as to why you are here, then I don't know. It's of interest, I hope, but maybe direct you towards also mutually supportive groups of people whom are experiencing the same issues as yourself. This is a very wonderful format for people to come together that are like-minded. We have the term in Buddhism, kalyana mita, noble friends. It's specific, it directly means, when translated, beautiful friendships. This is where similarly minded people practicing the Noble Eightfold Path are coming together to support each other. And likewise, if we have conditions like, I don't know, epilepsy, or maybe physical conditions, other physical conditions like diabetes or other problems in our lives, which are only to be expected. We are, of course, all born into aging, sickness and death. Then there are presumably, and I haven't really looked into it in any detail, many other forums and places where people can go and get support and advice in any such matters. But the Dharma is the teachings of how to live within this lifetime, and the supportive structure of the practice following the Noble Eightfold Path, keeping sila, moral precepts, practicing meditation and developing wisdom that can help everyone. Despite your abilities or lack of them, it doesn't matter. We don't need to be intellectual, we don't need to be physically fit. We can understand the Four Noble Truths, whomever we are, as long as we are sentient beings, or in the human realm, that is. We can understand that there is suffering, we can come to learn the cause of suffering, then see the potential for an end of suffering, and be able to appreciate and follow the path leading to that end of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. So hopefully you'll find something useful here, and maybe in other places also. It is in Pali, bhavite bahulikate sunyata. So I don't know what that means. Pali spelt with 2 A's, so there's some language differential here, maybe a Google Translate problem or something, and Bawi Te is BHAA. So this doesn't sound like the Pali language that I know, and the closest I can get to is Bhavatu Saba Mangalam, from whatever you're saying there. I only know from the Pali dictionary and from my Pali chanting book, Pali of that nature. Of course, in different traditions there are very many variations and interpretations, but I'm not sure what that was in relation to, I'm afraid. Another difficult one. Buddhism teaches energy play and zero or sunyata, but in sunyata also there is energy, as energy cannot be destroyed or created. So what is energy in sunyata is. So that's not really specifically what Buddhism teaches. The Buddha himself said he teaches suffering and the end of suffering. And we're referring to some aspects of physics there with regards to energy. To some extent, this can be applied as a simile or an example as to how karma works for cause and effect. For instance, for every action there is a reaction. For instance, this is science, this is physics. And although Buddhism is very scientific, the ultimate attainment of freedom from suffering in this lifetime, nibbana, is outside of this conditioned realm. All conditioned things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and out of our control, or not self, anicca, dukkha, anatta. Those of the conditioned realm we have words for, we can describe. What sunyata sunnata in the Pali is usually translated as emptiness. But emptiness tends to imply a container that is empty, whereas sunyata is the overall lacking of anything conditioned. So no conditioned things. So therefore a glimpse of nibbana, what the unconditioned realm is like. It is true, in physics, energy cannot be destroyed. It just passes or onto something else. It's just transferred. But that doesn't relate, because that comes within physics, comes within, like chemistry and biology, within the conditioned realm. This existence, samsara, of which sunyata is not. It is emptiness. If you think of yourself, a physical being that is empty, then it is still part of the conditioned realm, an empty container. But without the container, just emptiness is not space, which is air or an environment, but it is space with no content and no boundaries, and indescribable in that respect. I think you should listen to Ajahn Chah's speeches. I think you're addressing that to me. Well, yes, I have listened to all of Ajahn Chah's talks over the years and read all of the transcribed versions of those and listened to his original taped talks in Thai and their translations, because I was trained in Ajahn Chah monasteries over the years, so it's very much the background I come from. And yes, I would encourage anyone to read and listen to those talks also. I'm going to ask about physical pain again. As you've told me many times, pain is an intoxicant. I'm working on seeing the truth of this and would so value more insight on this, please. Do you mean the mind fixates to the point of obsession, as I'm really aware of that and how the proliferation comes? So what I mean by way of pain being an intoxication is if you're in pain, it's really hard to do something, isn't it? So let's say you're trying to do something quite technical. I can't think of an example. Let me say, you're trying to perhaps put together a model of some kind, or do a puzzle, something like this. Now this could have two effects. If you're in some really serious pain, your mind would really struggle to concentrate on the task in hand, or it could be that by concentrating on the task in hand, it takes your mind off of the pain. But in the case of chronic pain, it is more of an intoxicant because it is less likely to do the latter. It is more likely to make it difficult for you to simply apply mindfulness onto something else, or to do any task for that matter, let alone focus your conscious awareness onto one meditation object like the breath. Because you're in pain, it's difficult to do. So the Buddha himself describes pain being an intoxicant. And in my replies, and it's okay, you can ask as many times as you like because it's very relevant, I often say, don't forget pain is an intoxicant. It says so in the suttas, but you know it's an intoxicant because, like an intoxicant, it intoxicates your mind. It becomes, not that you are fixated on it, it just makes you unable to concentrate fully on anything else when you have a pain. So I've yet to get to the dentist. Someone kindly sent in a donation for me to go to the dentist in the city, and I've been putting it off, and now that the weather, or when the weather starts to improve, I will get round to it. But in short times, and I'm not in any way comparing this to the chronic pain that you might be suffering or others, but I have some toothache, very, very painful toothache, and I can do one of two things. Just bring my attention when meditating onto the tooth, the pain itself, and use that as my meditation object, or I could watch the breath. And I do neither, actually, because the pain is quite intense. Although it's very localized, it's not so bad, but it can be quite intense and affect quite your whole face. I just personally would take a paracetamol for that kind of pain. Other kind of pains, it may be appropriate to take ibuprofen. And I know a lot of people are loath to do that, but painkillers of that nature, I don't, from my own experience, think have any intoxicating effect. And even if they did, it's so mild by comparison to the intoxicating effect of the pain itself, it is the better option. And the Buddha himself, who suffered from a great deal of pain in his latter life, he was in his 80s and he'd spent most of the life practicing very ascetic practices, and then when teaching for 40 years, walking all over northeast India, living outside and on the floor and things like this, that he had very serious back pain to suffer, and often would comment that he'd had to end a Dharma talk to go and take relief because his back was paining him. And medicines are allowed for this purpose, to bring some form of relief to that form of suffering, where it's useful and practical to do so. We need to look after our bodies, but also we need to look after our minds. And where pain can intoxicate the mind, is it because it can become overwhelming. When you have, however, and if you have the opportunity whilst you're fit and able and healthy, because we are all born, like I've already said, into aging, sickness and death, where we should always look to is the sense of urgency in the practice. Whilst we are fit, young and healthy, I'm none of those, but when I wish I'd really got into the practice then, because that's the easiest time to develop the skills to be able to become deeply absorbed in samadhis, to experience the jhanas, and to be free from the suffering that the physical body and even the thoughts of the mind create. Whilst we're young, fit and able to do so, that is the time to begin the practice. So if we're continuously reminding us that we're subject to aging, sickness and death, and in Thailand they chant this, the lay people and the monks, once a day, twice a day, that we're born into aging, sickness and death, and all that we're we love, we will be parted from, as those that love us will be parted from too. Regularly, all of the time, reminding themselves of this very fragile nature, to reaffirm the sense of urgency to practice now. Because once you are very ill, it's not that it's too late, it's going to be much more difficult to incorporate the practice into relieving your suffering. Buddhism is not palliative care. It can be if it's developed whilst you're well, and it would be the best form of palliative care, because you can develop samadhi skills that you can bring in through your illness as it develops, so that you can, when have a toothache for instance, just go into samadhi and be free from it from that time without having to take the paracetamol or the ibuprofen. But the interim stage towards that, if your practice, or you're new to this practice, is take the relief that's available. When I was in hospital, I had extreme pain after an operation that I had here, and I took all the pain relief that was on offer to me, and I can't say it was conducive to concentration or meditation. Better in that situation was to maintain a mantra, Bhutto, 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 something like this, and to kind of hypnotize myself out of the intoxication of the pain, because it was extremely difficult to be with. But I did find that having some pain relief helped, and then I was able to just allow the body to settle, and to some extent it became more relaxed that way. If perhaps though I hadn't have had any prior experience of the practice, it would have just had to have been pain relief all the way, and then wanting to annihilate oneself, be zonked out, go to sleep, anaesthetized from it, rather than be awake to observe it, to experience it. And I had the operation itself whilst fully awake, although anaesthetized from the part down by way of a spinal anesthetic, which was an interesting experience that I wouldn't recommend, and perhaps wouldn't make that choice ever again. But to see and feel not the pain aspect, but the movement of being opened up and fiddled around with inside whilst fully awake is a thoroughly interesting experience, and a very deep insight into not self, anatta, that third characteristic of existence. So yes, if your mind fixates to the point of obsession, that is where you are not practicing mindfulness, and then it's developing into proliferation. That is then perhaps imagining about what this pain is leading to and how long it will continue. Where you can bring your awareness back to the breath, into the present moment, and not be thinking about the future, how long the pain will last, or how long it's been coming from the past, even how long you've had it, but just see, well, I am in pain in this present moment, but how does it feel, the pain, when I'm breathing in, and how does it feel when I'm breathing out? Is there a point where it's less painful? Is there a point when it's more painful? Are there any slight adjustments? We tend to overcompensate for pain. So we have a painful elbow, we might really stretch it, really think, or a painful knee, we might really jump up quickly and move something like this if we have a cramp. But sometimes the softer, more gentler approach can identify its source far more easily and alleviate the pain far more quickly, just by not reacting. This is why through the practice, whilst we're well and healthy, fit and young and able, we develop the qualities of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, joy, and then from those we develop equanimity, this unreactiveness, upekkha in the Pali word, which is the most important, or one of the most important qualities we can develop in this practice, and one of the factors of enlightenment. Upekkha, equanimity, that we don't jump about because we have cramp, we just move very gently and see that only the slightest movement is necessary, to alleviate the suffering, the pain. And in martial arts, very often you'll see that it's just the very slightest deflection of a blow that will make the opponent fall to one side, rather than a whole battle. And it's that slight, almost Tao philosophy of Wu Wei, going with the flow, but just making slight adjustments that we can do with our mind, without fixation, without proliferation, but with wisdom, seeing clearly, vipassana, into the body, where the pain is, making a very slight adjustment. Like I described in my last little Dharma talk, this little pain in my neck, a pinched nerve. It completely was stopping me being able to sit for any length of time at all. Instant pain as soon as I sat. But then the very slightest adjustment, that much only, it's not even visible to you there, is enough for that not to even be, it's not there, gone. That pain, which is severe, is not there. But if I sit like that, it would be. This is what we learn through the practice, but more easily whilst we're well. This is the sense of urgency. So at this sort of time of the month, just after the full moon of October, the Uposatha, the holy day, we should always, and every day in fact, but at least on these Uposatha days, the full moon and new moon, remind ourselves to reflect upon how well have we been spending our time. This last 15 days, have I been practicing meditation, supported by the foundations of sila, moral virtue? Have I kept the precepts? Because if you're not keeping the precepts, you won't be able to practice meditation very easily. You won't be able to develop deep levels of absorbed states of samadhi and experience the jhanas. And I mean, specifically, I will say this fifth precept that so many people are saying, oh, well, one glass of, well, not so many people actually anymore, but it does, get a little bit pushed aside as being, oh, well, that's optional, because it isn't, in fact, morally wrong in most parts of the world, most countries, or even religions, to drink alcohol. But in Buddhism, whilst it's not morally wrong, it leads to heedlessness, or the lack of mindfulness, which can result in being loose with the first four precepts: no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, or lying. So if you have a little bit of a few beers here and there, or the odd glass of wine, it could lead to a lack of mindfulness. And in order to develop this practice, we need to be mindful all of the time. So as much as people may have other ideas, I can't help with that. Only if people can keep the 5 precepts, the 5th precept, can I assure you that through the practice you will develop sufficient equanimity to be able to cope with most situations in life. And I'm not referring to anyone in particular, especially the persons who made this comment here, whom I know particularly abstains even from pain relief such as ibuprofen or paracetamol. Personally, I wouldn't suggest, if your pain would go away by taking such pain relief, then after taking professional medical advice, I would see nothing wrong with taking paracetamol or ibuprofen, depending on what is appropriate at the time, because I don't think it has significant intoxicating effects. And I think I'll be talking about that again in the future. So I'll leave it for there. And if there's any more questions relating to that, please just add them on later on and we'll continue. Can you tell all animals to quiet down? Please and thank you. No, they were here long before I was. So you might have just heard the dog next door barking. Well, it's his home. He's lived there many years. As have all the other dogs around here, and occasionally they make dog noises, cat noises. And that brings about another point I forgot to mention. You may have noticed, I saw a comment or two, that there was this activity with the cat and the lizard behind me in one of the talks recently. I did, just to reassure you, check afterwards, and the lizard was fine. It had gone into a state of probably shock, but I thought it was dead. And when I picked it up, it ran off. I picked it up to take it off into the woods, into the trees over there, and it just ran off very happily. Okay, so I think Rosie the cat was just playing a game with it. It didn't, she wasn't hungry, she didn't want to eat it, she didn't actually, it wasn't injured, it didn't appear to be injured. But thinking it was dead with some internal injuries or something, I moved it and it ran off very quickly and it seemed quite okay. But this is nature, and I don't alter or change anything about my surrounding environment. And if anything, it's part of the reality of all this. I mean, you should know that when you're listening to such a talk, if you're focusing on your attention onto the words that you're hearing, in a form, it's a kind of mindfulness, a practicing of mindfulness. Not quite a development of samadhi, because there's content that will provoke thought and questioning and reasoning and ideas. But it's mindfulness to keep your attention on what's being said and not be distracted by what's going on around in the background by way of sounds. However, I wouldn't want you to listen too hard. It's always a fine middle path, a fine balance to these things. If you miss something because there's a little noise, it doesn't matter. I repeat over and over again, time and time again, these answers, maybe in different ways, but it's the same answer, because this is as the suttas teach us as well, repeated some 84,000 times, that there's suffering and an end of suffering, and then the path leading to the end of suffering, because this is the Dharma, this is the word of the Buddha, this is what the Buddha and how he teaches us, by repeating with various different examples as appropriate to the relevant audience, time and time again. So you don't miss anything, and you can always go back 10 seconds and try and listen again or something like that, I don't know. But no, I would never try and change the environment I'm in. If anything, if anything became difficult about an environment, I would move myself, because that is only fair. But we are Buddhists, practicing Buddhists. We're not going around saying the world should be like this. Buddhism is about understanding the world is like this. Acceptance, understanding, with metta, with loving kindness towards all beings, with karuna, compassion for all beings and those whom are not supportive of our practice, perhaps, because we have the compassion that they too don't benefit from the practice, but maybe by seeing your example they will. And joy, mudita, joy for others and for ourselves with the practice we have. And this is how we develop equanimity, upekkha, towards all of those maybe what you consider distractions, but see them as lessons, as teachers in themselves. I'm not a teacher. I'm merely sharing my experiences here as a Buddhist monk, living with the practice as I do, with you for your benefit. But I have many teachers, and you have many teachers, from a mosquito landing and giving you a little bite and flying away again, or water pouring through the roof, or the internet not working, or there being some flooding, whatever, these little problems. It's all teaching us khanti, patience, endurance. Not so that we're suffering unduly, but we're learning not to suffer unduly by practicing patience through equanimity and understanding. Understanding this is the way it is, it's just that. And as if by cue, the dog stopped barking anyway. You see, this is impermanence demonstrating itself. Something you're having a problem with in the moment and is going to be suffering, dukkha, but it's also going to be anicca, impermanent. I mean, I'd like to ask these flies to stop flying in my eyes and my ears, but I can't, because I don't speak fly, they don't understand English, and they see nothing wrong with that. After all, they were here a long time before me. Okay. just going to perhaps skip through one there. I don't like to skip through, but it's quite a long one to read out, and I'm not sure how long I've been. Oh dear. That's okay. Well, these are two about Jesus. Now I'm gonna. I tried to skip through. Not that I always reply to these comments, all of the comments, but because there's a particular video on this channel that I made right at the beginning, it's only a very short one, but it's because it mentions the similarities between the teachings of Jesus and the Buddha. I don't know, it's got a lot of views and what have you. So there are quite a few comments, and good comments, which I respond to. But this is more a question, and I sometimes wonder if Jesus met Buddhism in his travels. Well, the likelihood is that he would have, because Buddhism precedes Christianity by about 500 years, and was also not only prolific 500 years after the Buddha's time in throughout India, and we know, of course, Sri Lanka and Thailand and Burma, but also in what is Persia, or was Persia, is now sort of Central Europe or something like that, even as far as Greece, which is how we get all these beautiful Buddha statues. It was Greek iconography that developed that image we see, like a Greek god-looking Buddha sitting mindfully meditating, comes from Greece influence. So, of course, in where Jerusalem was, and where Jesus was, and with all of the many passes through on that Silk Road, from east to west and vice versa, there would have been mention, for sure, of other religions, Islamic faiths, as well as the ones he was dealing with locally, the Judaic faiths, his own, that was. It was like it is just as much today. Common discussion. People would discuss political situations, they would discuss the weather, they would discuss economics, and of course they would discuss religion. So I'm sure he would have met and heard of Buddhism in his travels, which leads on to the next question relating to that same somewhat infamous little video of mine. Jesus started preaching as a teenager to the high priests. I don't know where people got the idea that Jesus had an Indian education, when clearly the first commandment states that there's no other gods beside him. So, just to get to the histrionics rather than the 10 commandments, or even the first commandment there, I don't think Jesus actually stated that he was a god. He said he was the Son of God, and that is in relation to the commandment. But that aside, Jesus did preach in his early teens, so age 13, 14. This is all that's documented in the Bible. We can only go from that documentation. What was written down, again, much later than the actual event. So to some extent, we have to have an element of belief, as much as we do with any written scriptures. But he was purported to be teaching to his elders in and around the temple and in those marketplaces, much like I just described, where people would be talking about economics, politics, the weather, and religion, of course. And there would be healthy and quite energetic, verbose debates going on, much like the internet of today, where you have all these forums and discussions, and occasionally I see trails of threads of conversation behind the comments on some of these videos. And I do hasten to add, I only ever read the first stage of that thread, so if you need to ask a second question, please make a new comment. Otherwise I don't go further, because I don't use social media or want to get into debate and conversation. Just try to answer as best I can the question in hand. This was all going on, and that is true. But the question we need to ask ourselves, and where this arises about this education from India is concerned, is it's not a fact or an idea that he had an Indian education at all. No, he was educated as he would have been in his village as normal until he reached the age of 14, when he had the bar mitzvah, the Jewish festival of coming of age. After which, so up to then, we hear all of what happened in his childhood, from the nativity through to him talking to all of the elders in the temple. As you quite rightly say, he was teaching the high priests there, supposedly. But after that bar mitzvah, age 14, no record at all, until he was age 30, when he reappears. Now, in the readings of the New Testament, there doesn't seem to be a time delay. One just assumes that he was going about his daily business. But if you think about 16 years, and those being your most formative and active years in life, aged 14 to aged 30, 16 years, unaccounted for. This is by someone who had a supposedly miraculous birth, a miraculous goings-on and upbringing, to teaching the high priests in the temple, and then suddenly switched off, blang. Ghosted, no social media, no marketplace discussions about anything, unheard of. Until all of a sudden, oh, he's age 30, bing, up he pops. And then he only teaches for 3 years, just 3. The Buddhists taught for 40 years. Jesus 3. What was he doing for 16 years? Some say he was a carpenter. Some say he travelled on the Silk Road from here to there and everywhere. There are records of, I forget the name, he's called Isha, I think, in the southern Himalayas, northeast India, as it was then, of him visiting there. And yes, visiting Buddhist monks and gaining experience and knowledge of jhanas, meditations. There's documented evidence as old, if not older, than the New Testament and the writings of the Bible, in original form, where it was written in parchment or wood or clay or stone or something like this, in those places. But again, this doesn't have to be believed, it doesn't matter. But what can actually be seen from all of these records is that absence, there being nothing going on. In the most famous man in history of humanity ever, nothing happened for 16 years with him in his most formative years, 50. When I think of what I did between the age of 14 and 30, I couldn't even begin to explain it all. So much. Yet this most famous man in history, by all accounts, literally, references to him, didn't do anything at all in that time. Instead, he waited until he was 30, when all of a sudden he was the best teacher ever in history. And I can say that even as a Buddhist, because whether it's correct, his teachings or not, more people have heard them than any other teacher in history to date, as it is now, currently. So I could be wrong there with regards to comparing that to, say, the teachings of Muhammad. But I'm not a religious scholar. I'm just replying to this comment innocently made with my own, uneducated, admittedly, innocent reply, without judgment or criticism, or trying to, by way, in any sense, influences anybody's beliefs. In Buddhism, as you know, we practice, we do as we were shown in order to experience for ourselves, as opposed to listening and being told what we are to believe. That is the difference. We practice, we see for ourselves, rather than being told and believing. So the idea, if you don't know where it comes from that there are other ideas that he may have gone to Europe. There are other ideas he was in Portugal. There is evidence of him being there, both prior to that age 30, when he began all his most important teaching that we've heard about, and then after his death and resurrection. Where did he go is often the quest that comes about, and it is evident in many places. He even apparently came to England. But this is only stuff to be believed. It isn't necessarily proven fact. But what is a fact is nothing is heard of him for a whole 16 years in the Bible, in the story of his life, in the basis, the scripture of Christianity. And that was my question. And that is why I bring it up. But it's also the question, the subject matter for many other debates on YouTube and the internet. And really that is the place for that inquiry, not really here. But it's coming up such a few times, I thought I'd better just give it the respect of some time and consideration. Oh, I don't know what the time I started now. How so? I want to follow your path. Can you please guide me? Please, yes, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Follow the Noble Eightfold Path. If that leads you into a practice you are enjoying, you're becoming happier as a result of it, your life is going more smoothly, then you may consider taking it further. If you're asking me about how to become a monk, there is a video on here entitled that. There are a couple, I think. But this largely depends, and to all of these questions of that nature, where you are, of course. If you've got a monastery just down the road from you, that's where I'm going to point you in the direction. Go there. Even if it's of a different tradition to what I'm used to, it's a good first port of call, because you will meet monks who can tell you about ordained life. But you know, you need to visit quite a few eventually, but that's where it begins. So maybe watch those other videos, but if you have specific questions, please, you can email and at least tell me where you are, and I can maybe point you in the right direction. So if you told me you were in southern India, I'd send you straight away to my own monastery, the Mahabodhi Society in Bangalore, or anywhere in India, because there's 26 branches now. I'd send you to one of those branches where they would be very happy to help you. If you're in England, I can send you to where I began there, Chittaviveka or Amaravati. Not send you, tell you how to find them yourself. Just wherever country you're in, Google Buddhist monastery or Buddhist temple. If nothing comes up, you'll know there's probably none around, but they're not always on there. So ask around, find Buddhist communities, and they'll point you in the direction. If you're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, you will end up here. It's what happens. I didn't plan this, I didn't intend it to be. I started practicing meditation before I even knew what Buddhism was. And I continued with the practice on understanding of Buddhism, practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, and eventually this is what led to my ordination, and I'm still now a monk some years later, and I'm living here practicing like this. I think probably I've spoken for long enough for this talk. I have no idea how long that is until I turn it off. But I hope there is something useful there for you. If there is, please use it. If not, just let it go. And if it isn't in accordance with your views, that's also okay. We're all entitled to our own views and different views. Now in Buddhism, we have right view, but that's only pertaining to Buddhism and the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, and which includes the Noble Eightfold Path, the laws of karma, that is cause and effect, that all we do will bring about results, and the nature of rebirth, whether we are born and then out of nothing and die into nothing, or whether we are coming from a previous life and will be reborn into a future life. This understanding comes into the Buddhist form of right view, samaditi. So that's the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path. But a question, I think that this one is coming up actually, so I might as well, is asking me where to begin with the Noble Eightfold Path. Well, it doesn't have a beginning, it's a circular thing. You see, the Four Noble Truths ends in the Noble Eightfold Path, being the way out of suffering, and right view establishes the beginnings of that understanding. But that Noble Eightfold Path is then right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right meditation, leading us to right view. So we are developing all of those steps. It's not really a path from A to B, it's a circular trip. It's synergy of development of all stages, all steps. But if we divide it into three aspects, so sila, moral virtue, samadhi, meditation, and panya, wisdom, we'll know more easily and see more clearly that we need sila, moral virtue, in order to practice meditation, and then we need meditation to develop wisdom. And it's wisdom that leads us to keeping sila. So again, circular, but it all happens together. Slowly, bit by bit, gradually, stage by stage, but not step by step specifically. So although they're referred to as steps, they're really links to one another in a chain. Okay? So on that, I hope it's useful. If not, let it go, and until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.